the job, that tells me something might be breaking down at the interview point as well. So when you're in terms of going into that interview, it is an opportunity to sell yourself. You want to be marketing what your abilities are, what your interests, what maybe personality trait, what is your previous work experience, what do you bring to the employer? It informs you about the employer as well. So it should be an opportunity or a conversation so that, yes, the employer is learning lots about you, but you will also have an opportunity to ask some questions so that you are learning about the employer, so that you can come out and make an informed decision if a job is being offered to you. And then it's also you know, knowing the employer needs, the history. What is the work environment like? What are the business activities of a potential employer? And maybe what are their future plans? And that may be why they're hiring. So those are all the types of things that both parties of the interview, both the employer and you as the job seeker, should be coming away from an interview with a lot more information from both sides. So just in terms of the types of interviews that that you may have experienced in the past or be asked to participate in. So we have what's one of the types is called a directed interview. So that is this is where the interviewer is going to take lots of notes using an outline. They'll have a set list of questions. They may have a checklist. It is one that's designed. It is more of an impersonal one. It's very to the point. It does seek to reveal you know, facts, and it is a type of interview that does compare you to others. So if there's a field of candidates, that every candidate is going to have this same directed interview. Another type of an interview is an audition. So this could be a simulation or a brief exercise to evaluate your skills. So some people may have had there's a couple places where I've seen it. When I worked in the hospitality industry, this was a very common type of interview where somebody would actually be in the kitchen and be asked to maybe show their knife skills or prepare a dish. That is a type of an audition where you are being evaluated on your skills. I've also seen it in lots of office environments where you may go through an interview and then you'll be asked to sit down on a computer and maybe do a number of tasks on the computer so you can, you know, show evidence of your computer skills. So those are examples of a type of interview that would be considered an audition. There's also a group interview. So this is where you will have several applicants at one time. It does provide a sense of your leadership potential and leadership style. It can also identify how you may interact with peers. And it also will allow you to you know, keep an eye on the interviewer. So that group interview is where you have one interviewer or maybe two, but then there's a group of candidates all together. Okay. Another type is more of the undirected interview. So obviously it's more unstructured. It's a very open discussion of your qualifications. You may hear questions in there like, you know, tell me about yourself. You know, why did you apply for this position? So there may not be that structured checklist. It's much more unstructured and just more of a conversation. There's also the behavioral interview. So this is becoming a much more common type of interview where they're interested in your past behaviors. So and we'll talk a little bit more about behavioral style questions. They're becoming very common in interviews as well. So this is where you would want to be prepared to have some stories to demonstrate, again, evidence of your skills or your abilities to be able to handle difficult situations or working with customers or things like that. So it's always those behavioral type questions are looking at your past behavior, because oftentimes that is indicative of future behavior. So that's where where those behavioral style questions come from. And then there's also the panel or the board type interview, and that is where you have several interviewers are present, and they may take turns asking a set list of questions. These positions are oftentimes with government agencies or larger organizations, oftentimes where there's a formal HR department. You may see more of the panel or board interview type interview situations, and this is where you want to be able to maintain good eye contact when you're answering questions, because you've got a number of different people that you're talking to all at the same time, even though they may take turns asking questions. So that's a very common one as well. And then there's also the telephone interview. Oftentimes this may be used kind of as a screening device or a pre-screening device. It determines if the applicant has the right qualifications. It may be used also to determine how interested an applicant actually is in the position. So they are doing some of that kind of pre-qualifying before maybe they bring you in for a second interview, a face-to-face interview as a second interview. It does also allow them to assess some communication skills, maybe not necessarily in a face-to-face situation, but it does allow you to assess some of those communication skills. And then it may also be just to help the interviewer fill out some missing information about the applicant, again, before they make a decision about whether they're going to have you come in for a face-to-face second interview. So and there's certainly other types of interviews out there. That's just kind of some of the more common ones that people may have had exposure to or have had experience with in the past. So in terms of looking at preparing for an interview, there's some work that you should be doing before you hit the door of an interviewer. You want to be gathering your work samples, having a copy of your resume, a list of your references, and then determining how you want to have those with you. So putting them into some type of a portfolio or presentable case, a file folder. You can determine what's going to work best for you. Some people, if they've done a formal portfolio, they may have a whole binder of work samples that they would bring with them to the interview, so that you can show evidence of that work or tasks or skills as part of the interview. Bring a pen, as part of your presentation case, whatever you're bringing everything in, but make sure it's laid out so that you're not fumbling over stuff and trying to look for things. Make sure that it's in an organized fashion. You want to make sure that you're rehearsing your answers. So if there are, and we'll talk more about some questions and answers further on in the presentation, but knowing some answers that you want to that you have prepared for particular questions. Prepare questions to ask. So these are the questions that you would bring with you that you are going to ask of the interviewer, typically near the end of an interview. Most times interviews will kind of end up with, so do you have any questions for us? This is where you would want to have some questions already prepared that you can ask as part of the interview as well. Review your work history, know the different elements within your work history that you want to be able to present or talk about in more detail as part of your interview and when you are answering some of your questions. Practicing those answers to common interview questions. And then also knowing the interview location. So it may not seem like an obvious thing to do, but you want to make sure that you do know where you are going that day. So obtain directions to the interview location. If it's possible, maybe do a drive-by so that you know exactly where where you have to go. Where the parking is available. If you're not driving there, if you're taking a bus route, know how long it's going to take. So you have to prepare for all of that ahead of time so that that you're there on time and you're not flustered because something has gone wrong. And then be prepared for surprises. You don't always know what's going to happen in an interview, and sometimes it's hard to anticipate what may happen, but be prepared for something that you weren't planning on. Okay. So again, before the interview, you research that company, ask some questions. When somebody is contacting you in terms of setting up the interview, don't be afraid to ask some questions in terms of, how many people will be interviewing me? How can I best prepare for the interview? So it's okay to ask some of those questions. I've actually, in interview workshops in the past, I've asked people, if you had the option of knowing whether you were going into an interview with one individual or if you were going into a panel, would you want to know that? And there's some people who identify, yes, I absolutely would want to know that, and there's other people who said, if I knew I was going into a panel of interviewers, I wouldn't sleep the night before. So, just think about, is that something that I always believe it is good information. If you know that you're going to be interviewed by 4 people, I think if you think you're going in for an interview with one and you walk through a door and there's 4 people sitting in that room, is that enough to throw you off your game for that day? And that's not the point in time where you need to be thrown off kilter, is right at the beginning of your interview. So, don't, be assertive in asking some of those questions as when the interview is being set up. Review any material about the company, so visiting the company website. If you can get your hand on annual reports or any company literature. Hopefully maybe you've done some of this even prior to applying to a company, but or if you know somebody who works inside that company, trying to get as much information about the company as possible is certainly going to help you in terms of preparation for your interview. And sometimes some of this research that you are doing, visiting the company website, learning as much as you can, sometimes that research will help lead to some questions that you can ask that we're going to talk about a little bit further in. So all of that research is good information to have. And prior to the interview, you may have some of this anxiety, in terms of if you're very nervous during an interview, you've got to be able to get a handle on that anxiety. So there are some things that you can do to prepare yourself to be as relaxed and appear to be more self-confident when you're going into that interview. So that you may have to, get some relaxation exercises. Obviously, that research that we've been talking about can only prepare you that much better for an interview, so that you can ask some informed questions, that you can speak to how your skills and abilities may be a good fit for the company. So all of that research is going to help you in terms of being more self-confident when you are answering those questions. And of course, practice. So the more practice you can get with answering specific questions, it's going to be better. If you can sit down and do a mock interview is probably a good idea as well. There's lots of software out there now also that can help with doing some of these practice interviews or mock interviews, where you can set up to have a number of questions asked of you. You can set up your web camera and actually record an entire interview so that you can see how you are presenting and you can hear how you may be answering some of your questions. And so that you're not saying all the time, or that you're not fidgeting, or those are the types of things that you will learn about your interview style, your interview presentation by going through a mock interview. Or even just sitting down with somebody and having somebody else ask you questions that you can practice answers and get some feedback on some of those answers as well. And then also being prepared is the best way to reduce some of that anxiety and help ensure a successful employment interview. So if anxiety is something that you really struggle with in terms of preparing for an interview or on interview day, it's important to be aware of what some of those triggers are so that you can kind of figure out how to best address some of that anxiety and become a little more relaxed and feel more self-confident when you're going into the interview. So now you've gotten to the interview. You know, hopefully you've arrived a few minutes early. You want to be there ahead of your interview. Sitting in the reception area, you know, is a good opportunity to kind of observe what's happening in that environment as well. When you come into the interview, you are going to greet everyone that's involved in the interview process, whether it's one-on-one or whether it is a group interview where there are 2 or 3 interviewers or more. Try to remember their names. A good firm handshake to each of the individuals that you meet. Be friendly to everyone. So we always talk about when you are trying to get into an interview or you're trying to get into a company, be friendly to everyone you speak to. It could be the secretary or the receptionist at the front desk. You may go on a tour as part of your interview, and you may be introduced to other employees. You want to make sure that you are friendly, even the person on the phone that you booked the interview with, because they potentially could become a part of that interview process. They're not actually in the room with you during the interview, but I have actually seen it where someone from the interview panel may come back out to a receptionist and ask that receptionist what their opinion was of that individual. Maybe did they observe something about that individual. So be friendly to everyone that you meet during the entire process. Follow the interviewer's lead, so in terms of what direction they give you, maybe selecting a seat. Sometimes if it's a group interview, there may be a chair that's already set up because the other interviewers are around a table. And then also be sure that your cell phone is turned off. So there is a point in the, you know, you have to have that cell phone turned off from the time that you go into the interview, or put it on silence or vibrate, but your cell phone should not ever be ringing during an interview. And of course, I have read stories where not only do cell phones ring, but people actually answer them during an interview, and that would be the ultimate no during an interview as well. So you want to make sure that your cell phone is turned off prior to going into an interview. And then during the interview, again, you know, being friendly, showing your enthusiasm, being positive and honest, maintaining good eye contact. And sometimes that's difficult for people, and certainly it does become, it's probably one of the most common questions I get when people are going into those group interviews is how do I maintain eye contact with everybody? But and usually what I tell people in those situations is whoever is asking the question, you tend to make eye contact with them because that's who you're speaking to, but you are still glancing at the other interviewers in the room, and then of course that eye contact is going to change if they're all taking turns answering questions. So you want to make sure that you're maintaining eye contact with everybody who's in the room. Express yourself, but certainly, again, in a very positive tone. Never criticize previous employers. I do work for Lambton College. I work in Petrolia, which is a smaller community outside of the Sarnia. It's in Lambton County. It's outside of Sarnia. But when you're working in smaller communities, you never ever, you should never be criticizing previous employers, because the first thing an employer will think of is, if you are talking negatively about an employer, would you do the same to me? And that could be enough to you know, not have you get the job. Be very aware of your body language. So when you're in an interview, and this is where a mock interview can certainly help to be able to know how you are carrying yourself, and be aware of that body language, trying to have open body language as opposed to closed body language. Be a good listener. So it's important that you are listening to the questions that are being asked of you in an interview, and on that point, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If you're not sure what they're asking you as you are listening to the question being asked, make sure that you are asking for clarification. Okay, emphasize your strengths. So again, that preparation, going through your work history and knowing what your strengths are. And when I'm working in resume clinics, people tend to downplay their strengths. You know, they're not very good at something, or you know, they don't feel qualified for a job. But when you start talking to somebody about what your strengths and skills are, and then we do it again in the interview situation. The interview is the after your resume is the next time that you have an opportunity to tell the employer what your strengths are. So outside of the resume and the interview, they may not have any other way of knowing, and unless they're asking for your references, they may get some of that from your references. But it's important in an interview process to be emphasizing your strengths. Be yourself so that you're getting a sense from the employer in terms of whether it's going to be a good match. Okay, they're gauging that on their side as well. Avoid personal issues. The interview is not a time to bring up any type of personal issues. Be confident. So if you're doing the preparation and you're doing the research, I think by nature that preparation is going to help you give that, you are going to exude that self-confidence in the course of an interview. Discussing ways that you can contribute as well. So again, I think that builds back to emphasizing your strengths and telling them why you would be a good fit for the position that you are being interviewed for. So sometimes you may get some of those off-the-wall questions, and kind of the purpose of those is to test your ability to be able to operate under pressure. So yes, we tell people to prepare for as many questions as you can as part of the interview process, but there may be that off-the-wall question, and they just want to be able to see if you're able to work well under pressure. It's going to help you to demonstrate your problem-solving skills as well, to show evidence of that, and an opportunity for you to think quickly, thinking quickly on your feet, to be able to question and communicate as well. So it may be a bit of a test of your communication skills in terms of some of those off-the-wall questions. Sometimes they may be also there to just determine maybe creativity. Sometimes you'll get some of those kind of off-the-wall questions as well. And sometimes those are hard to prepare for, and that's where sometimes you get those surprises. You got to be able to kind of think on your feet. And then oftentimes there will be an opportunity for you to ask questions as part of the interview as well. So an interview will allow you to ask questions. It is usually kind of a way of starting to wrap up the interview. Oftentimes you'll get that question near the end. They've completed asking all of their questions. Now you have an opportunity to ask questions of them. And you should always have some thoughtful questions prepared to ask. Sometimes those can be, one of the questions that I usually suggest to have people ask is when they will be making a decision about who they're going to be hiring. And there's a couple reasons for that. One of them is it gives you an opportunity to kind of know what their timeline is. So if one of the questions you ask is, when will you be making a decision about the candidates, they may identify, well, Joe here is going on, he's going on vacation for a couple of days, we have to do some reference checks, but we will be getting back in touch with everybody by, say, next Tuesday or Wednesday. So now you have a timeline of when they're looking at having somebody hired, or it could be, we are going to know by tomorrow. So with that timeline, now you know if you haven't heard, and that may be a follow-up question, will you be contacting all of the candidates one way or the other? So then you also know, are you going to get a phone call from them? Some employers they will call the successful candidate, but then they will also call all the other candidates and let them know that they have made a decision. And that can be an opportunity then for you to ask questions about your interview and get a little bit of feedback. That is golden if you can get that kind of information out of an employer from your interview. However, to get back to that timeline, now if you haven't heard back from an employer, that will give you kind of the time frame of when you might be able to do a follow-up call and just find out the status of the hiring for that position. So that's a good example of a question that you can ask. Again, that research that I talked about earlier, you may find something on their website that's identifying maybe something about future growth, or where is the company going to be, you know, are they looking at expanding, or so those are some questions that you can put some thought into to be able to ask at this portion of the interview. Okay. So this was an infographic that I had found when I was putting together this interview presentation. And just let me go back here because I want to make this a little bit bigger for you. There. So these are just some other examples of questions that candidates can ask during the interview process. So how would you describe the company culture? So you can ask about work time flexibility, what the dress code might be, the type of atmosphere at the workplace, those types of things. So you want to learn a little bit about the company culture. Will there be any form of training provided? So you could ask if the company provides a professional training program. Is that something that you would be a part of before joining? Or candidates will be put on a sailboat in a thunderstorm without oars. Just is there training provided as part of the orientation process? So you could ask about is there an orientation program that you would be expected to go through? Another example might be the challenges or the future plans of the business. So we talked about that, maybe something that you learned from visiting their website, understand, excuse me, why there is a need for hiring. Okay, ask if there's any strategic tie-ups or future plans for the business function. You could ask about the parameters that company uses for evaluation, just in terms of how performance is evaluated as part of their company. Opportunities within the organization. So does the company provide opportunities for professional growth, like learning new courses, certifications that you may be able to take, on-site training, on-the-job training, other appraisals or promotions. Again, so that time, I talked about this already in terms of the time frame for making the decision, because knowing that can help you in deciding future plan of action. The other thing that may help you with is if you know a company is making a decision fairly soon, you may have another job offer. So, and I have had clients where they feel they're in a bit of a conundrum because they're waiting on one job interview, but they've had another job offer. So those are all types of things that if you have that information from an interview, it's helping with your decision-making process as well. And then, may I contact you if there are any further questions? So recruiters are usually the first point of contact for a company, so don't hesitate in reaching out to them. Anytime that you can get somebody's business card as part of this process is ideal as well, because then, if you've asked this question, can I contact you for further questions? And if you can get their business card with their email on it, that's ideal, because now you have that contact information. So that's just an example of some types of questions that you should be thinking about and have prepared for when you are going into the interview. So that is something else that you would also include in that package that you are putting together, that has your resume, that has your portfolio, if it has some of your work experiences and things that you've done in the past. Another part of that should be questions. So I always say don't commit them to memory. You're probably already nervous enough as it is when you are going into the interview, so don't commit that to memory. It's okay to have those written down, and when they're asking you if you have questions, you've got your portfolio or your folder there, you can open them up and go to those questions. I think that only shows to an interviewer that you have put some thought into these questions, you have prepared for them, and I think that's something else that speaks to the employer in terms of the level of preparation that you've done for the interview. Okay. Now let me get out of this here. There we go. So now, in terms of some questions that may be asked of you, so these are questions that, some typical questions that you may hear in kind of a standard interview, questions about yourself. So the employer is trying to find out what they can about you. So you may hear questions, tell me about yourself, or why did you choose the program that you chose to go through school for? Why did you apply to this company? So what experience have you had that's relevant to this position? Those are all questions that may come towards you at the beginning of an interview. What would you consider your major achievements? So these are opportunities for you to really sell yourself. Talk about your strengths. Talk about previous work experiences. Again, trying to make sure that they're always relevant to what the employer is looking for in this particular interview. Okay. They may ask questions about the job. So what interests you about this job that you are being interviewed for? What do you know about this organization? So showing that you've done your preparation, that you've done your research. I had one client one time who said one of the very first questions that she was asked of in an interview was if she had actually visited their website, and she hadn't. She hadn't done that preparation. So she felt right from the very beginning she wasn't able to speak to the employer about having visited their website. That was one of the questions right off the top. So it is really important that you do that research and preparation. What other options might you be considering? How do you see your career developing, a year from now, 5 years from now? You may hear some questions about that. If you were a head of a department, what would be your priorities? So that, again, depending on the type of interview that you're in or that you have applied for, they may be looking at some of that past behavior. That would be an example of a behavior-based question. What would you prioritize? What do you see as most important? So those are types of questions that you may need to be prepared for depending on the interview that you're going into. These competency-based interviews, these are the behavior-based. So a company identifies key skills that are required for a job, and they are looking for those competencies based on the skills that they have identified are important in a job. It designs questions to elicit evidence of skills. And the emphasis, again, is on those past behaviors as a predictor of success or a predictor of future behavior. So it's always based on your past behavior. So there's a couple of different topics there that you may hear different types of behavior-based or competency-based questions, in terms of teamwork. So describing a team project that maybe you have led in the past and what types of problems arose. How did you deal with those problems? Types of communication questions, describing a situation where you had to persuade others to support your view. Interpersonal questions. So what kinds of people do you find difficult to work with? Taking responsibility. So describe a time when you took responsibility to achieve a challenging goal. And some problem solving. So tell me about a time when you had several tasks to manage at one time with conflicting deadlines, and how did you deal with that situation? And that is where you can use a strategy called STAR. So when you're preparing for these competency-based interviews, you identify the competencies that are required for the job. So it may be going back to the job posting and identifying within that job posting all the things that the employer was looking for. Those are the key skill areas that they are determining the level of competency that they are requiring. You define each competency in terms of a behavioral term, so it may go back to some of these types of behaviors: the teamwork, the communication, interpersonal skills. Identify a past experience to help illustrate how you demonstrated that behavior. So that's where you can tell some stories on how you've dealt with a problem situation in the past and what was the outcome. Prepare examples for each of those competencies. based on what the employer may be looking for. Practice talking about your experience and try to give a complete answer. So that, that what we talk about STAR stands for situation, the task, the what you did in terms of coming towards a solution, the action that you took, as well as the result or the outcome. So you want to make sure that the story or the situation that you were describing is going to have a positive outcome. It's going to reflect the positive skills that you've used in terms of resolving that situation. So here, give an example of a problem that you encountered. How did you approach it, and what was the outcome? So that's where you would, and again, you can think back into your previous work experience. Was there a situation where you did encounter a problem? What was the task or the problem that arose? Was something asked of you? What action did you take? What did you do to help resolve that situation? And it might have been that it was maybe something that you couldn't deal with. It wasn't a problem that you could deal with effectively, but you maybe got the person in charge that could help with resolving that problem, or having a positive outcome or a positive result. So that's that STAR response that you can use to create answers to some of these competency-based questions. And when I'm talking about describing a situation or telling a story, it doesn't need to be a long, drawn-out story. You can tell this, go through this entire STAR response in a very succinct response or answer. Okay. And then you can follow that up with what did you learn from that experience. So that would be a good way to kind of wrap up the answer to that question after you've gone through the whole STAR description in terms of the situation and the task and what was the outcome. So what was your learning experience from having gone through that that situation. So when the interview is finished, you can ask when you can expect a decision, or if you should call. Always express thanks for their time. So if it's one interviewer or if it's multiple, you want to make sure that you have thanked them for their time. Following up with a thank you note or a letter, that's where it's really handy if you can get someone's business card with an email on it, to be able to do that follow-up. And typically, you should try and do that within 24 hours of the interview. Once you've completed the interview, I always say, analyze your performance in interviews. So I usually tell my clients, when you come out of an interview, write down as many questions as you can right away, as well as if you can remember what you answered, because that can be really good information that you can go through with an employment consultant to look at how you did in that interview, but then also it gives you an opportunity when you are following up, because perhaps after you've left the interview there's something else that you maybe want to express to the interview team. You can certainly do that as part of your follow-up as well. And it's giving you another point of contact with that interview team. So again, it's showing initiative. It's a very courteous thing to do, but it is also showing initiative as well as thanking them for their time and having that additional point of contact. But typically that follow-up should be done within within 24 hours of the interview happening. It is important not to get discouraged, to learn from the process and be patient, and sometimes that's very difficult when you're in the throes of an ongoing job search, and it can get discouraging if you've had several interviews and you feel like you're just not getting ahead, or you're not getting any job offers. So if that is the case, I think it is important to maybe touch down with an employment consultant and go through and review what's happened in interviews. Are you extremely nervous? Are you fumbling over your words? Is there a way that you can help minimize that anxiety and just be feeling more confident prior to going into the interview. I think all of those things are going to help you perform better in future interviews. So in terms of some interview do's and don'ts, you know, body language is really important. It is important to smile. We talked about making good eye contact and just being aware of your own body movements and how you are presenting. And it's also important to kind of watch body language of the interviewer as well. But obviously there are some do nots there. You know, make sure you're not chewing gum, don't distract the interviewer, don't bring family or friends to an interview, try not to use slang, don't ramble on, so try and keep your answers very succinct and to the point. I've actually done mock interviews with clients when I'm asking them a sample question and they'll very easily get off on a tangent. Sometimes that can happen partly because of nerves. It can happen very easily, so you want to be very aware of that so that you're careful that you're not getting kind of off on that tangent. Okay. Some good do's: do formulate your answers before beginning to speak. Avoid using well, you know, those hesitant type language. Try to reduce that as much as possible. Again, don't be afraid to ask for clarification. If you are not sure of what they're asking, it's okay to ask for clarification. Try not to do it on every question, but it's better to ask for clarification than to not understand the question that's being asked of you and then you do go off on a tangent or you're answering something that's completely irrelevant to the question that was asked. And that's where that listening skill can be very helpful during the course of an interview. And of course, again, be very aware of that body language. Again, during the entire process, when you're sitting in the reception area, being courteous all the way along throughout. In terms of knowing what to dress or how to dress for success in the course of an interview, it is important to take into account the weather. You know, we've just come out of a very hot summer, so you want to make sure that that you are dressing appropriately for the interview and that you are taking into account the weather. Some people will perspire or sweat during an interview because they're nervous, so it's important to just be aware of that when you are choosing what you're going to wear for an interview. Think conservative, traditional. Make sure whatever you're wearing is neat and clean. Dress to fit in. They usually suggest dark or neutral colors, and then little or no scent. So this has become a real point of contention, and I see it here in our center a lot. I can have somebody walk past my door and I can smell cologne or perfume that wafts in my office as I'm sitting at my desk, maybe 6 or 8 feet away from where they've walked. That's way too much. There are a lot more employers and work environments that are completely scent-free. I know our college is one of them, and that is something that they do identify for every interviewer that is coming in. They remind people of our no scent policy. So you want to make sure that there's little, if it's a no scent environment, make sure that you are not wearing cologne or perfume, because there, it's actually become a health and safety issue in some places. So I know our college has done a huge campaign on a whole scent-free environment, but certainly for an interview, you want to make sure that you're not overdoing it and overpowering, somebody who's in an interview situation. So just make sure little or no scent as part of what you're wearing. Make sure not wearing clothes with printed logos. You don't need formal wear. Never wear hats indoors. Anything that's revealing. T-shirts, tank tops, those types of things. Appropriate footwear. So try not to wear anything that's worn out or torn, and again, the strong scents or overdoing it with jewelry. And there are some places where if you don't have an appropriate interview, something to wear to an interview, there are lots of agencies that now have programs that will help people get an outfit for interviews if you're going into a number of interviews. So you want to make sure that it's something appropriate and appropriate for the type of work that you are being interviewed for. Okay. So just in terms of some blunders, as part of my research for this presentation, I had found some information from Forbes actually on some of the biggest blunders that happen during interviews, and some of them that they identified were not doing homework. So again, you know, you can't emphasize it enough in terms of being prepared and doing some research and doing your homework, knowing the company that you're going into, not practicing your weak spots. So if you know that there is a particular question that maybe you've had in the past that has thrown you for a loop in an interview, I always call that your bugaboo question. That's the question you want to practice most often, so that it is, if it is asked of you in future interviews, you feel more prepared to be able to answer. It's not going to throw you off your game. It's not going to catch you off guard. You'll feel confident that in your mind, if you hear that question, you're thinking, I've got this one. I know how I'm going to answer it. Not focusing on appearance, you know, that you never get that, you know, how do they say it? You never get a second chance to make a first impression. So oftentimes, if appearance is an issue, sometimes that evaluation or that assessment is made early on in the interview, and it may make the difference between getting the job and not getting the job. Not remembering names. So if if you are going in and you are shaking somebody's hand, you've been introduced to them, call them by name. That may help you to remember their name, so you can speak to them and call them their name, you know, maybe during the interview or as you're wrapping up. So remembering names is really important. Not honing your storytelling skills. So those are really important for some of those behavioral-based questions, the competency-based questions where you may be talking about a previous experience that you've had maybe in a previous job situation. Honing those storytelling skills can be very helpful. And use that STAR strategy, describing the situation. What was the task that was asked of you? What action did you take, and what was the outcome as a result of that? Not listening, so we talked about those listening skills earlier, and you know, again, you've maybe misheard a question, or you've not listened carefully, and you're maybe going off on a tangent and not answering the question relevant to what the employer is looking for.
Mary
Ellen,
oh yes, I just have a question, Mary Ellen. So how do you handle questions about past employment history if you've had several recent positions?
Well, often, and we certainly I've had that with clients. You know, when they're preparing their resume, you know, how they lay that out. But if you've had multiple positions in the past, you know, if they are a contract, you know, you want to identify that that you've had a number of contract positions. I know. I'll tell you two situations where I've had to help people with what their bugaboo questions were. One was if they were fired from a previous position. They're always concerned, you know, if they're going to be asked, you know, why they left a last position. You don't want to lie and say that, you know, if you were fired, you know, you don't want to lie and say you weren't fired. I think if that's the case, you need to have a prepared answer in terms of because oftentimes if you say, yes, I was terminated from a previous position, you could have all the answers in the world and they're not going to hear them. They don't hear anything past that you were terminated. So you have to be very careful how you answer that one. The other one, when I worked with a lot of WSIB clients, their difficult question to answer was, again, why they left a previous position, because if they've had a WSIB claim, they always felt that they were marked. So if you've had a lot of short-term previous employment, and that is asked of you, I think you need to identify if they were either temporary positions or contract positions. If it's one you've been terminated from, I think you need to sit and have a very well prepared answer in terms of why you left that last position. That's not something you want to just wing if it's asked of you in an interview. So if that is part of your previous work experience or work history, you want to have a very well prepared answer for that. And that's what I would practice prior to. So it's not throwing you for a loop. If they're going through your resume and asking why you left your previous position, have a prepared answer for that one. If it's multiple positions and it was temporary, or you know, and I have seen people's resumes where they're identifying they've been with a temporary agency and they've worked with multiple companies. So you know, you've got to identify that. But I think you can also identify that maybe that's a good, that you've had multiple experiences. So talk about that in terms of you've worked in different work environments and your flexibility. So there are ways that you can talk about the positive elements of that as well. Does that help?
Okay. So that was David. So I'm sure David will respond if he has an additional question. Okay, David?
Okay.
Yep. Thank you.
Was there something more specific that David wanted me to answer, or?
No, just that was the question, and maybe it'll come in.
Okay.
Maybe he'll come in with a second question.
Okay. Okay.
Yep. No, he's saying that was great.
Okay. Perfect. Okay. So yeah, and then I think just the last point there on those blunders was, you know, not asking the right questions. So you know, make sure that you are, when you're coming away from the interview, that you have garnered the information that you need to make a decision as well. And I have had clients, I've done it myself, where I have come out of an interview and I'm thinking, I've asked the questions and that just isn't a fit for me. And that was okay for, you know, in that time and space to make that decision, rather than going into an environment that I knew was not going to be a fit. So make sure that you're asking the right questions so that you are coming out with information to make your own decisions. So just in terms, just remember, just kind of as a wrap-up, that it is normal to be nervous in an interview because we don't always know what's going to be asked of us as part of the interview. Take that deep breath and make sure that you're trying to stay relaxed. Don't let nervousness interfere with your answers or conversation. It is, if that is something that you feel you're really stuttering or you're not sure how to answer certain questions, that's where that preparation, you know, with an employment consultant or a family member, or you know, if you have an HR, someone who works in HR, or someone who's done hiring in the past that can help you with some of those answers, that I think is also going to help minimize that nervousness. It's not going to get rid of it altogether, but I think it can help you maintain some control. And then remind yourself that this is just part of the process to see if you are a good fit for the position. And as sometimes you go into an interview, it's your dream job, everything's on the line. That's probably when you're going to be more nervous, as opposed to where an interview where you maybe don't know as much about the company. It is important that you are getting all that information. It is part of that process, and you may go to an interview that you come away feeling that it may not be the best fit for you. Or you learn something in the interview. Maybe the hours aren't going to work for your lifestyle, or you know, those types of things. It's important that you're bringing all this information together, because it is a decision-making process on both sides. You know, obviously, I think that kind of the overall tone of this, you know, having a successful interview is being prepared. So, you know, going in, being yourself, being prepared, I think is going to allow you to be more confident. Practice is going to help with that confidence as well, and hopefully that's going to help you have that successful interview that will lead to getting a job. Does anybody have any questions or an experience that they wanted to share in terms of an interview that might be helpful to somebody else who's going into an interview or preparing for interviews?
So yes, I do have one more question. How do you handle questions? Where do you see yourself in 5 years?
I would probably start with a shorter term. I wouldn't go just right to the end. I would say, you know, here's maybe what I've been doing as part of my career plan. Here's where I'd like to be maybe in a year, and maybe build up, because maybe there's going to be additional training or additional certification that you want to work towards as part of a longer term plan. And you may not know in 5 years. It may be just a short-term versus a longer-term plan, and maybe not put a number to it might be helpful as well. But I think hopefully you've given some thought to where you do want to be as part. Is this interview that you're in right now a stepping stone to something further along. So those, and that's why I think breaking it down into a short-term plan and a longer-term plan. And that longer-term plan might only be 3 years from now. You know, it might be 5 years. It might be 10. I don't know where I'm going to be in 10 years. I know that for a fact. So I wouldn't even begin to talk that far in advance. But I kind of like the shorter term versus longer term, and maybe are there some other stepping stones as part of that longer term goal. And part of that stepping stone might be the job for the interview of which you're sitting in at that point in time. Does anybody else have any other suggestions?
No, I've just got a thank you from Joy.
Okay.
Yeah, she's saying it was very helpful. So